you This is the Constructionist Podcast, where we take ancient stories, the person of Jesus, current events and topics, and help you construct a new Christian worldview that's relevant and loving to those around you. I'm your host, Kevin Bates. I'm a semiotician and community builder looking at the signs of the times to build a better future together. This,
everybody.
Yes, welcome everybody to our podcast. My name is Kevin, and Sharia and Jake are with me. And those of you who are joining us online, thanks for joining us today. We are talking this morning about visibility for our neighbors, and mostly circling around the topic of the LGBTQ plus community and visibility for them and what that all means. If you want to find out more about our community, you can go to our app, Resonate Christian Church, or to our website, resonatechristian.church, where you can find out more of who we are. So, visibility for our neighbors. We talk a lot about visibility in our talks. We share a lot about loving our neighbor, what that looks like tangibly, and how we can engage in loving our neighbor, seeing our neighbor, being seen as a neighbor, loving our neighbor tangibly with like action, so action of love. But I have a question that I'm going to start out by asking this morning, because my segment has to do with social construction of identity and basically who deserves to be seen. Who deserves to be seen in society? So my question this morning is kind of a undercurrent question, and that is, who gets to decide who's worth seeing in the first place? Who gets to decide that? Because that is a decision in our society. We make that decision on a daily basis, and that's not a social question. That's not a political question. It's a construction question. Because visibility, who counts, who belongs, who's named as a neighbor, these aren't natural. Those are not natural facts. Those are basically constructed facts. They're built in our society, in systems, in stories, in power, and by whom? By us. By us as society. We construct these things together. And so what makes it interesting and a little bit uncomfortable, I would say, is most of us are participating in that construction, whether you want to or not. It's not like you're a mean person, right? It's not like you're malicious, but we're all participating in those constructions on a daily basis because we inherited frameworks in society. We inherited constructions in society. We absorb or just accept categories, and those maps that we, let's call them maps, that we inherited, we use maps that we didn't draw. We use maps that we then rarely question as well. So when we accept a social norm, somebody else drew that. Somebody else constructed that social norm. And we can try to say, well, that wasn't my fault. And that's probably true that it wasn't my fault, but we are participating in something that we didn't draw or we didn't construct, and we perpetuate something. Maybe that could be the fault. So once you know, though, the map is there, once you know that the construction is there in society, what do we do with that? And so today my section is going to be on, again, social construction of identity and what it means, where it shows up, and I guess more importantly, what do we do as a community when we see something? How do we change it, or how do we participate in changing it or reconstructing it? So social constructionism, right? So social constructionism, at its core, is this idea. It's categories that we organize in the world. So race, gender, class, we say the word neighbor, we mean something by neighbor. Outsider, we use the term criminal, even the term community leader. That has a definition to it, right? these aren't handed down by God and nature. These are handed down basically by people over time, and usually people in power have constructed these ideas. And that doesn't mean that they're not real, but it does mean that they're real in a particular way, right? Just because they're constructed by people doesn't mean that they're not real in this way. We've all agreed to treat them or to perpetuate them. We've all agreed upon them, and that's what makes them real. As a society, we say, these are the races, right? As society, we say, these are the neighbors, or this is a neighborhood. As a society, we have just agreed, and that sometimes has enormous consequences. When we've all agreed on a concept or a construction, and that construction is unhealthy or toxic or damaging or oppressive. I mean, we used to all agree that slavery was okay, right? And that construction of, well, the majority thought it was okay. So, and that's why it was legal.
The majority in power thought it was
power, right?
was
So that was agreed upon, right? That we would just perpetuate this idea, and that had enormous consequences. So here's a simple example of how this works. We have a word called neighborhood, right? Neighborhood. And we use that pretty loosely. This is my neighborhood, right? These are my neighbors. This is my neighborhood. I live on a cul-de-sac. This is my neighborhood, right? This is my street. I like my neighborhood. And I like my neighbors, most of them. So it sounds neutral, right? And it sounds mostly like geography, right? I live on this cul-de-sac, and that's a geographical point on a map. But I want you to consider where the word comes from, neighborhood. Okay? The word neighborhood comes from an Old English word, ne-geber. And some people have translated new translation into borough, right? But we translated that or use that now as neighborhood, right? And it actually meant, in Old English, it meant near dweller. So that's just a proximity thing. The person next door to me is my near dweller. It was kind of an agrarian farmer type term. And the word was primarily just in geography, right? The person across the street type of thing. The person who lives close to you. There was no value judgment built into it. There was no hierarchy judgment built into it. It was just nearness, right? The challenge, though, is when we added the ending hood, neighborhood. And the idea of hood at the end of a word, whether it be childhood or parenthood or likelihood, adds the definition, the condition of my child experiences, the condition of my parental abilities, the condition of what something is likely, false, or true. Likelihood, parenthood, childhood. Neighborhood means the condition of my neighbors. The condition of my neighbors. So neighborhood takes on kind of a little bit different meaning. And so now we have redlining. That's the federal practice of literally drawing lines around communities
redistricting,
predominantly of color, and marking them as high risk for lending purposes. So we're not going to lend to this group because they are redlined. They are at a high risk. So that is a construction. That's a deliberate choice made by people basically with government authority and boards and just looking at society and shaping who could own a home, who could build wealth, and who could be a neighbor in a legal and basically protected and visible sense. And this went on for generations of people. And so those lines are not on maps anymore. That would be illegal in today's markets, but it's still in the data. And you'll see it on home deeds. Every once in a while, home deeds still have redlining principles written in them. And there's wealth gaps that it's coupled with, and all kinds of things have happened. Who gets a loan, who doesn't get a loan, who can build wealth, who can't. So the map wasn't describing reality. The map actually was making reality, and that's a challenge. Let me move on to a philosophical or sociological concept, because there's two people, Berger and Luckman, in the 60s. They actually defined this idea, and they said that constructed social realities are built on these three things, like a step process: externalization, objectivation, not objectification, but objectivation, and internalization. Now, just think about this for a moment and try to pick out where else you see this in the world today. Okay, externalization, objectivation, and internalization. I make something up. I just think about it and say, this is true, right? This is my reality. I don't like this person because ... right? And I, in a sense, make a judgment call or an assumption on an individual or an idea. Then we start treating that individual idea, assumption, we start treating that as objective fact. Okay? That's my judgment. That's my assumption. Therefore, it's truth, right? We treat it. And then we then internalize that truth into just the way things are. So I make something up, I then call it true, and then I just assume that's the way things are. I don't know if you've seen that in politics today, but that is our political spectrum right now, where people are just making things up, and then on social media, we declare it as truth, right? And then we just accept that's the way things are and we can't change them. So basically, the category then feels natural at that point. The construction of that kind of disappears, and it becomes very powerful in society. That becomes very powerful. It's happening all over the place, and it is a dangerous step process that people are going through. So once you see something like that, once you see social maps being built, once you realize that is happening, you kind of can't unsee that. You kind of can't unrealize that when you actually see it.
What's the book you're reading right now? Geography.
I can't remember the name of it. It's the 7 maps that basically determined everything in history and current times.
I've heard of that, but I don't know.
Prisoners of Geography.
Prisoners
of
of
Geography. Yeah. Where just our maps that we have decided and people have decided have controlled wealth, power, domination, kingdoms, and it's just the way things were drawn is the way things are, and it's controlled so much in our society. So let's get concrete. So let's bring it out of the clouds and let's look at it concrete, because construction doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? So this doesn't happen like it happens through media outlets. It happens through power. Who gets the pen, right? So whoever gets the pen gets to write the map. And that's usually the person in power. So think about local news that covers neighborhood crime, right? Local news, then there's a classical body of research that's out there that they're all drawing from. And basically this neighborhood is dealing with challenges, and that neighborhood's white. And so they're dealing with challenges that they're having a hard time overcoming. But this neighborhood that's black and brown is a dangerous neighborhood that's riddled with crime, right? Think about just how it's said, right? So when we hear that kind of stuff, same data, same crime, literally same action, but it's worded differently. So it's softer here, it's harder here, depending on your news outlet determines, what side of that fence you're on and what you're listening to. So that algorithm basically becomes the framer of the construction in your brain. Basically policies, investment, city council, state legislation, all of that, how that's framed and how that is spoken determines and shapes what we believe about that something. So think about this: Latino drug crime. I mean, literally boats are being, bombed in the sea, right? Because of Latino drug crime. They're the criminals. Think about how that's framed in the news, right? And we listen to that and we go, wow. I was listening to a comedian and he said, think about Latino crime and our crimes. We're flying a plane and there's some cocaine on the plane. They make movies about that, right? And it's kind of fun to watch. But white people crime and child trafficking is not seen on the same level. Trafficking is here. Our crime, white people crime, ends up in documentaries. That was what the comedian was saying. Latino crime ends up in the movies and it's exciting and thrilling, but white people crime ends up in documentaries that is sick and weird, right? It's creepy crime. So, but think about how child sex trafficking and Latino drug crime is imbalanced in our media. And think about how it's framed. I mean, I don't know what you think is worse, right? I don't know what you think is better or worse crime. But think about how it's just framed and constructed.
Also the consumer of it, right?
Right.
Who's paying for all of it?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay. So there's another French philosopher, Foucault, right? I learned how to pronounce it. Foucault had this concept called power knowledge. The idea that power doesn't oppress necessarily, it produces. So power produces knowledge, categories, and the lens in which you think is normal or deviant, good or bad. So power produces. It produces frameworks in which you see through. It produces knowledge of what you believe, and it produces the lens of what you think is normal or deviant. Who belongs, who is a threat, who is evil, who is good, right, in society. The people with power determine those terms. The people with power determines the pen who's writing the map. So, which means the question is, basically, are people being seen, yes or no? But a deeper question is, who is doing the seeing? Who is actually seeing this person who is not seeing another person, and what framework are they being brought to it? I think that visibility sometimes is a very dehumanizing act as well. So not everybody wants to be visible. And they don't want certain aspects of their life or judgment to be visible, because we make people visible by poverty. Look at these homeless people and we make them very visible. Crime rates, their problems, that's visibility too. But it also frames something challenging. It frames assumptions. It frames
Stereotypes.
Certain types and certain narratives, and perpetuates certain narratives. So visibility is not necessarily liberation, but visibility with dignity is liberation. And I think we need to just differentiate that a little bit. So what we lose when people disappear, this is what we lose. I think that I want to name some things that are at stake. Visibility, I think, misses something, and it's taken. I'm going to take this from a book from the 1950s called The Invisible Man. I don't know if you remember the book The Invisible Man. That was required reading back in the day. It was about a black man who basically was looking at society in general and entering into different social constructs and writing about how he was not seen in these different social constructs. It's an old book, but he starts with this: I am an invisible man. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. People refuse to see me. So he was talking about a particular social violence when people look at somebody, but they don't register that somebody. When people actually see a human being, but they're not registering that person as a certain human being, or treating them basically as absent. And this person who wrote this book was basically showing a lived, embodied experience that, psychologically, economically, physically, he wasn't seen. and that had great consequences. So I think communities sometimes are rendered invisible. They don't show up in planning documents. They don't show up in history and the curriculum. I mean, think about Native Americans and how unseen they are in our curriculum when we talk about American history in school. How unseen many things are when it comes to who actually discovered the Americas.
Were they even discovered?
Were the Americas even discovered, right? When you think about Native Americans, I mean, throw in the Vikings. I mean, at least throw in the Vikings, right? where when we talk about our curriculum, it seems like that white Eurocentric ideas make it to the top of the list, right? When it comes to visibility and who is seen. People that are in neighborhoods, who is seen and who is unseen. Resources then don't flow to the unseen. Decisions are made without the unseen. Over time, unseen people then become, that becomes self-reinforcing. We continue, I see this with Native American culture, where we just continue to unsee or not see certain people. And we start addressing this problem and this problem and this problem. Like, but what happened to that problem? Like, are we just totally ignoring this or that problem? And so when you're unseen, you're not counted. You don't exist in the data again. And since you don't exist in the data, you don't get resourced. And I've seen this in my work with grants. I've seen this actually in tangible ways where people think that DEI has been this horrible concept. But when I'm the white guy in the room and all attention is on me as the white middle-class male, and all questions are directed to me, and all money is flown to me, and I'm sitting there going, well, what about her? You know, in the room? Or what about that person over there? Or I'm sitting in a room and literally everyone in the room is male and white.
I think an example of that, there was an Oregon grant that came out.
Oh, this is a great example.
I forgot what the grant was. I can't remember what it was specifically, but it was during COVID. And
it was a COVID grant, yeah.
But it was, I forget what department was giving it out. The grant opened and closed by capacity in less than 4 minutes.
Yeah.
And you had to know English. You had to have legal documentation ready to go. You had in order to, if you were at any type of ESL, you weren't even able to fill out the paperwork.
And it was a portal that was only in English. And at the bottom of the portal, there was a little download. Download this in your language. And then you could download the PDF. And then you could fill that PDF out and submit it. But the portal didn't open. You couldn't access that document until the portal opened. And so the money was gone within minutes.
It was, I believe it was only open for 4 minutes to get capacity.
And who filled out that form? It was registered later and reported later that mostly accountants and lawyers got on that portal and filled that out for other people. And so you had to have money to pay somebody to fill that out in order to get that special grant. That's one example, but I have lived experience around corporate tables that is how life works. And life is working. So it raises the question and urgency for me in this room is in the systems we operate in, our church, our businesses, our workplaces, our organizations, who is currently invisible? I mean, that's an urgent question. Just ask that. Who is invisible in your networks, right? Not because you decided to exclude them. It's just because nobody's stopping to ask. Maybe we can stop to ask the question. Who is invisible in this room? I was in a meeting once where there was a city official in the meeting and there was one woman at the table. And that woman mentioned something and then asked a question. And he raised his hand out and said, now. And then started in on his little discourse of nowing this person. and basically shut her up in the room. And I excused him from that table. I fired him from the group. He was a volunteer, and I fired a volunteer. And I fired because sitting around a table and actually now-nowing the only woman at the table, right, was just completely offensive. So are we willing to be that kind of ally, right? And asking the question first, who is invisible and who's going to be invisible? Now, Deborah. Now. You know, don't get too upset now, right? So I think there's active work to be done, right? So if identities and belongings are constructed, and that's my theory that they're constructed, and harmful constructions can be built by systems and sustained by stories being told, right? Then the question becomes, what does reconstruction look like? What does it actually look like, and who does the work? And I want to offer 3 things because I think these are important. The first is narrative reclamation. When you can reclaim a narrative and you can say, wait a minute, why don't you tell your story, and offer the table where that person speaks the narrative, I think that's really important. And reclaiming those narratives in society, I think we need to do some hard work there. This is what like murals do, right? When you have a mural in downtown Portland, or if you have a painting, or if you have a Latino artwork, or if you have an Asian artwork, I think those can reclaim stories. And doing a lot of work when it comes to the arts and display of art and things, those can reclaim stories. Public radio does that, right? Where they give voice to alternate stories. That's what podcasts like this can do, where we reclaim stories, not just content, but counter construction. So can we reconstruct something? And that's what these 2 are going to talk about, is community by resistance, or community is the resistance. So the second thing, though, if we can reclaim stories, how do we reclaim a story, though? And I think that second is proximity. The story of a trans person changes when you know a trans person. When you actually know somebody that's trans, that story changes in your mind. And proximity actually is very important. Dehumanization requires distance. That requires separation. But when you know a homeless person, when you actually know somebody that's homeless, that changes that narrative for you. When you actually know somebody that maybe is mentally ill, that changes that conversation. No longer are they just some weird schizophrenic. You say, wow, okay, that person is a real person struggling with real issues, right? So proximity is I guess, could help you make decisions. It can challenge your narrative. I think that proximity, when you decide who you are, there was another philosopher that said, Baldwin said this: once you decide who you are, and that decision most challenged, most tested, when you are actually standing next to a person whose life and dominant narrative has taught you to fear and ignore, when let's say the gay person, you're afraid of that person, and all of a sudden you know somebody that is that, all of a sudden all of your assumptions are challenged. All of your assumptions are basically deconstructed. Here's the third, and I think this is important: institutional imagination. When we are in our groups, when we are in our environments, whether that be a volunteer, whether that be in a workplace, whether that be in an organization we run, or whether that be in this church, or whether that be wherever you are, I think challenging obvious things is important, and it's work we need to do. So reimagine what that institution could look like. Reimagine basically who could be seen at the table. I'm at city official meetings all the time. And when I think about like zoning or loans being offered, there's a great bank in Portland that actually offers funding for people of color and underserved communities, and that's their mission. I really appreciate that, because banks are not seen to kindly in our world today, right? They're usually the money grabbers, right? But they have done a lot of work of trying to get money to those that haven't been invited to the table normally. And it's frustrating work sometimes. Changing systems is frustrating, long, tedious work, and it doesn't get you promoted, and it doesn't get you in the headlines. So I want to close with this first section, and I'm going to be really specific with this because I think real work lies in being very specific. One of the communities that is most persistently and deliberately rendered invisible, and worse, is made invisible through distortion, is the LGBTQ plus community. And since this is our month-long topic, I think that distortion has come from the very institution that I've been a part of, Those That Speak for God. And that has been a dangerous, dangerous act by my colleagues and such. And I think that construction for decades has run deep. LGBTQ plus community, their identity is built on this, the cultural imagination that they are deviant. They're icky. It's the ick factor. And people look at it and it's different and ew, right? That's not normal. And so that deviancy is run deep in our language and in our cultural construction. They're broken. There's something wrong with them. There's something to be fixed. There's something to be hidden. And that was a constructed conclusion. That was a constructed act through pulpits, through legislation, psychiatric manuals, family systems telling our children to disappear, telling our children to hide, things like that, that people couldn't see them because you're an embarrassment to the family or whatever. The cost of that distorted visibility or invisibility, you're talking about the highest rates of depression, anxiety, homelessness, and suicide of any community, and it's concentrated in teens and young people. That is a horrific and staggering conclusion and data point. That's not a coincidence. That's not because they're in sin and deviant. That is because we constructed a reality around them that speaks something so horrible and invalidating to them that suicide sometimes is the only answer for them. If I was invalidated to that point, I would be scrambling, white-knuckling my life as well. I think anyone in this room would. And so every institution, when they agree that you do not belong, there's something that happens to our brains when that happens to us. So when we talk about reconstruction, I think the urgent acts of reconstruction from institutions and communities like ours, faith communities and such, we need to rewrite that story. We need to reconstruct that story. You don't have to agree with a lifestyle to reconstruct a story. I don't agree with a portion of your lifestyles, and I can live in the same room with you. And I can be a part of the same community, and we can draw different maps. I think we can draw different maps. And the word neighbor, right? The word neighbor from the tradition that I come from, when Jesus said to love our neighbor, that's an ethical question. That's a moral command. That's not a geographical idea. That's a person. Jesus is talking about a person. And the neighbor, actually, when Jesus says you need to be a neighbor, that's the person who will stop and see the person in the ditch on the side of the road. What you did for the least of me, you did least of these you did for me. When you clothed and helped and housed and fed, that's what makes you a neighbor. So we don't walk past that person because the system tells me that person's not a person. The Samaritan is on the road, and I walk past that person because the system tells me that's not a person. Somebody came along very powerful in subsequent years and said, we need to treat that person as a very person and love that person intentionally. because the system called them a non-person and a non-belonging. So for a lot of LGBTQ plus people, especially young people, especially people who grew up in religious homes, the church has been the one walking past the person in the ditch. And I think it's time to reconstruct becoming the one who stops. We need to be the one who actually stops and asking the question, basically, who is invisible at the table and how can I bring them forward? Who belongs here? And be intentional about that. Because if we reconstruct that map, I think that some people claim that they're following Jesus by calling out somebody's sin. I think Jesus would have acted much differently if he was on earth today walking around to marginalized groups and oppressed people. Jesus would be acting much different besides categorizing somebody as invisible and not belonging, because he created a table, and that table says all people are welcome. And he dined with notorious people that society said you were wrong and you didn't belong. And if that person is not invited to the table, if a gay person is not invited to the table, I'm not invited to the table. And we need to be very careful. That's the invitation today, is to create a different map, to create a different narrative, to create a different belonging, and to find people that are invisible and to help them become visible.
Can I go back to your Good Samaritan metaphor?
Yeah.
In today's, I think, language, the Samaritans had the ick factor, right? They were the outsiders that procreated with people that were left behind and were so they had the ick.
Yeah.
So in the story, I think it's safe to say that if it was today, who would the Samaritan be? They would probably be someone within the LGBTQ plus community that helped and served and saved the normal person.
Let's go to our questions. We have 4 or 5 questions that are going to be up on the screen. You can
start? A couple of announcements before I totally get going. I'll turn off the video behind me because it's a little glitchy. This next Saturday? Yes. June 13th, from 2 to 6 p.m. at Stella Olson Park is Sherwood's Pride Festival that's put on by a group of students, and I forget the name of the organization they're with.
Is it the GSA?
Youth Activision Club. Resonate is a sponsor of the event. We usually do a free hug booth. And so if you have any questions or want to participate in that, talk to Amanda about it. So please do that.
Or Becky.
Is Becky leading it too? Or Becky, or anyone, we can all get you there. It's going to be just fine. The second thing I want to bring attention to is that last spring, we did a series of podcasts on the idea that God is good with gays. And we looked at 3 different books and topics about the different lenses that homosexuality and LGBTQ+ could be viewed scripturally. And so if you want to look at that, just go to our apps, go to media, and you can type in the word gay, and all of it will come up. But Shreya made that point, not me.
That's the easiest way to find it.
The 3 are 2 pro and 1 against, and so we did use the counter narrative. So it's not just all the same.
The book that I went through was The Widening of God's Grace, which was written
Mercy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Mercy. Yeah, thank you. Widening of God's Mercy, and I forget the author's name. He was the dean of Duke Divinity for a long time. Him and his son wrote it together. But he wrote an article in a previous book, and it was basically if you're gay, just live celibate, and that was the conclusion of his argument. And this time he came back and apologized for that article, and then expanded on what it could look like to be included in God's mercy. And so it's always widening. God's mercy is never shrinking. It's always getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so if you're in an institution or an environment that you feel like mercy and grace and opening is getting smaller, then you're in the wrong type of environment. Any other first thoughts? No?
No.
Yes. Next Saturday as well in the evening time, Resonate Men after the event is going to a movie, and I forget the movie's name, and I'll have the event on our website, I promise, today. Sorry, Bill. So
It's Devil Wears Prada, right?
Men's group. So it's for men, yeah. Women are not invited. Sorry.
We could have our own party. Do you want to have our
Kelly
own
was
party?
invited, so I'm not sure. Okay. They're going to be at the Joy Cinema, the drive-in in Newburgh, or hopefully we can keep it out of corporate, but Regal if not. Not He-Man, but that would be a great movie. He-Man. Kevin and I read a book a while ago about the history of He-Man and how it was the idea of masculinity is to protect, to provide, and to procreate. Those are the 3 ideas of humanity. And so if you see a group of people that are being attacked, demoralized, demeaned, that a masculine response is to protect that person.
Mm-hmm.
It's not to join into the attack. And so that's actually a great transition into what we're talking about, into community as resistance. What we can build outside of default institutions and systems to make the world a more inclusive and representative space. So when you look at your community around you, community is not always chosen people. It's made up of lots of different people, lots of different ideas, lots of different structures, lots of different ethnic groups, lots of different sexualities, genders, everything. And so your community can be chosen to an extent of the people that you surround yourself with, but if you open yourself up, your community gets wider and wider and wider. And we're always going to talk about wider. The phrase that I keep coming back to is they built something better. They built something better. On the slogan, it's a simple historical observation about what communities do when the institutions that are supposed to hold them up either turn away from them or actively push them out. So we have systems in place in institutions that are supposed to protect individuals, and what those can do oftentimes, and most of the time, I think, is like every institution has failed people, every single one. And to not actually start with that, and to know that we have a long ways to go, that the pendulum has not swung that far because we're always in a back and forth whiplash, then we need to understand institutions have failed people. Like we talked earlier about Native Americans. Show of hands, this is fun. Who can tell me what Native American group used to own this land that we're on today?
It's written on a sign in at the water feature, the splash pad. I can't remember it.
That's right.
The Kalapuya.
Yeah, Kalapuya.
Specifically, I think the Atfalati Kalapuya.
Yeah, Aflati Kalapuya. And so to understand that we come after those people as well, and that's also a marginalized group of people. And so we have institutions that push people outside.
Well, an institution that pushed that group outside was when the new plaza was built. There was advocacy to give a land acknowledgement, but then that wasn't given. So just that small conversation, I know it wasn't a huge conversation, but just a small conversation amongst people that I was given privy to, that it kind of didn't make it to the front of the conversation. So that happens in small micro groups
And microaggressions and everything else.
Yeah.
So Kevin last talked about whoever holds the pen draws the map. Whoever, to the victor, to the spoil, the writer of history are the ones that dominated. There are a people history movement right now, but truly our history is defined by those who are in power and who have succeeded and who win. And so what happens to the people that don't win? Where are their stories held at? History keeps showing us this, that when communities are excluded from the structures that are supposed to provide belonging, safety, and care, they don't just disappear, they build something. Sometimes out of grief. Communities are built out of grief. Sometimes out of necessity. Sometimes eventually out of something that starts to look like joy. Can we build communities out of joy? And that's what I mean about communities as resistance, that we can build together groups of people that stand in resistance to what is currently the tide of things, I think. The aggression, the attack, the anger, the violence, the chaos. Right now, social media is very fueled on chaos. And so to not engage with that chaos, what'd you call it? Objectivation?
Objectivation. Yeah.
So the objectivation of things, that's not actually true. Or you can hold two vantage points at the same time, that not everyone has to think alike. Everyone heard the slogan, great minds think alike. Anyone know the second part of that? Fools seldom differ. So great minds think alike, but fools seldom differ. If there's not two vantage points or views in the room, you're not going to have the best outcome. You're not going to do it. Institutions as antagonists. And this is where I start to talk about the church. And looking through church history has not been very clean for Native Americans, for people of color, for the LGBTQ plus community, for anyone that stands outside. And I would say Charlemagne forward. The Christian church started as an organization of fringe movement that was on the tertiary, on the outside. It was not for people of power. So when we read scripture as a vantage point of being in power, we are totally missing the point of all of Christianity, of all history. If you can come away from reading scripture and vindicate violence, vindicate hatred, vindicate pushing people outside, then you are not understanding where we started that, and therefore everything is bunk. Charlemagne forward, it was twisted and put into an idea that we can control people by putting them into environments where one of our tenets is discipline, it's agreeableness, it's the work ethic that goes beyond other ideas. It makes us very malleable. It makes us be a better individual, but also can be used to help people stay in power. When I talk about specifically LGBTQ+, I want to talk about the word homosexual. And so you cannot with scripture say that homosexuality is bad or good. Truly. The word homosexual was added into scripture in 1946. That was in a push against communism, against anything that was outside of our bell curve of normal. And that was deliberately put in there so that anybody outside of this normal procreating, advancing of our society would be pushed aside. The word that they translated into homosexual comes from effeminate, which can be used as eunuch or castrating yourself, or the abusers of themselves with humankind. So suicide, eunuchs, the self-flagellants, anything else. Opus Dei is a great example of that. If you don't know what that is, it's okay. So
Don't look it up.
So the word homosexual didn't even exist in our passages before 1946, and in one of the main verses that people point to debunk to say that homosexuality is a sin, the very next clause is about not eating shellfish. So if you're going to be okay with saying that this is wrong, you should also be okay with this is wrong. And so Jewish Levitical law, if you're going to follow one piece of it, go ahead and follow the whole thing, please. Which is pretty awful. Don't do it. This week, a man walked in, and we have our pride poster up. I just looked out and remember this. Amanda and I were at the counter. Amanda's actually in the back. I was standing up front. And he looked past me, and he says, "Why are you celebrating pride? I want to ask that question." And at that point, looked past me, went straight to Amanda, which is fine. But I think that what he was trying to do was assert dominance. And that's a very,
I think he was definitely trying to assert dominance.
He was trying to assert dominance.
He has a history of this.
Last time I got into it with him was there was an elderly woman up front with a mask on, and she was concerned that he was behind her without a mask on. And he started screaming at her, and I had to raise my voice at him, which I don't do often.
Frail old woman.
A frail old woman. And that has defined him in my head since. So
Single story.
I single storied this, Theo, bro. It's going to be okay.
And then he came back and did it again to himself.
Yeah, totally.
He keeps just coming back for more. I know other people like that. So, sorry, Bill. So the idea is that we are holding. It was not Bill. It was not Bill. We try so hard to hold our positions of power on sand, on ideas that don't actually exist. It's objectivation that Kevin was talking about. I'm going to skip this part.
Can I ask you a question at this point? Because
Yeah.
my Theo bro friends would go back to, they wouldn't necessarily, because they know these arguments with like New Testament scripture and homosexuality not being like a word used or even thought about back in the day. because like same-sex attraction or like an actual relationship with homosexual acts wasn't a thing back in the day. So as known,
I
or
mean,
as
it was a thing. They had different
they
categories.
had different categories, but also the writers didn't write about that, right? So they always go back to creation and Adam, Eve ideas. Now we know that
Adam and Steve. Is that what
This
you're
right.
saying?
Well,
This is in my section if we want to put a
great.
pin
We're
in
gonna
it.
okay. Let's
Okay.
wait for Shrey over
Can you
that one.
talk about the pederast?
No.
Okay, so let me bring up this argument. So if you look at New Testament versus Old Testament, and you're not willing to follow the whole thing, and you say, "Well, I'm just a New Testament Christian," you hear that a lot, right? One of the only healings that we have of Jesus in the New Testament was the pederast slave, and so there was a Roman centurion that came to Jesus and said to him, "My servant is dying. Can you please help him?" The original text would say that my pederast is dying, or basically that my servant that I sleep with, because a Roman soldier, a Roman person had their wife and the male and female slave that they also had sex with.
Yeah, in Roman culture, when you're a Roman male, you had your wife, you had your mistress, and then you had a boy.
And Jesus heals this boy.
Right.
Boy is
Yeah.
no one knows the age of that.
Yeah.
So
Up to 30, right?
up to 35.
Yeah.
And so they had this idea that it is in the New Testament and there is proof of that. Keep going?
Yeah.
So what resistance actually looked like? Let's talk about Reagan.
Ugh.
In 1987, when Reagan first used the word publicly, AIDS, 20,000 Americans have already died. And the church, the institution that holds up the Good Samaritan as its model, that preaches the radical welcome of the table, that claims to be the body of Christ in the world, largely looked away because we didn't know what to do with it.
Can I toss out a stat that I saw yesterday?
Please go ahead.
More people died of AIDS than died in the Vietnam War, at
Yeah.
least on the American side.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's a pretty staggering number.
I mean, how many in the room have people that they know or friends that died from AIDS? I do. I mean, that was a big thing when I was young.
Yeah, huge thing, especially in the late 80s. Another issue is that we had medication for it already,
Yeah.
and we knew
AZT.
about it.
The funding wasn't there for it.
Well,
Wasn't given.
we took the funding
Yeah,
away from
wasn't
it.
given. Yeah.
The main researchers of AIDS were pulled out of the centralized tables of conversation so that the drugs couldn't advance. And then a lot of it is founded in the Christian idea of morality, that this is moral and this is immoral. And so we were not putting money into those immoral practices. That was a big push as well for Jerry Falwell and the moral majority.
Right.
And that's when they started attacking abortion as well. I am moving very slow. So I'm going to go back to the idea of Reconstruction and what community as resistance looks like in Reconstruction. And I'm going to try to end with this because I'm already almost a half hour. Historical honesty. We have a culture, we have an identity. We're a church, you're a person, you probably are heteronormative if you're listening to this. So you have a history of what's come before you. And if we don't hold that history into account of what happened, to identify it and to know what that holds for people that had to endure that, then we're not looking at the full picture. We can't reconstruct if we're not looking honestly at what's happened in the past. You can't build a new map if you pretend the old one wasn't even drawn in the first place. It means being willing to name what our tradition built not as an act of self-flagellation, as we talked about earlier, but as the basic prerequisite to repair. When we went through a series a long time ago on the Book of Forgiving by Desmond Tutu, and the first idea of that is to tell the story. You have to tell the story of what happened, or there can be no forgiveness. And most of the time, that story is of the person that did the hurt. Second is the idea of proximity that Kevin talked about earlier, but proximity without agenda. So if you do not know gay, trans, lesbian, bi, non-binary, people of color even, if you don't have these people in your life, then you're not really living within proximity of people on the outside. And so something that honestly this symposium has allowed us to do is to be in community with a lot of those people. They come in, they talk to us, we hire them, and they're great. But that puts a name and a face to an issue, right? And so it takes issue and puts it into a person. So how do we help serve them? How do we protect them? How do we provide for them safe space? And the third is proximity. So you can choose your neighbors, you can choose your friends. You can't always choose the community that you're in, but you can start to welcome the people that are already here but hiding. And so I think that's a great illustration, is that these people are around us all the time. And sometimes they are too afraid, and sometimes we overlook them. I think most of the time we overlook them because they don't fit our bell curve of normal. So how do we change that? That's it.
If I could just add to my Christian nationalist friends that are friends, and they have hook, line, sinker bought into Christian nationalism. If that is you, or if you have a Christian nationalist like bend in your life, that you believe that we're a Christian nation built on the principles of founding fathers that were Christian, there's lots of debate around that, and I'm not negating that debate. Out of that conversation, we are all created by God with inalienable rights. We have rights. And the initial right is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Period. And if you look at another person, it doesn't say if ... right? It's because you're created by God. We have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as a human right. If we would just stay there and camp there and say, I don't agree with your behavior, I don't agree with who you are, I don't even like you, right? Or whatever it is. But because we're created by God, we have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think if we would just stay there, we would actually be a better society, a more unified society, maybe even a more productive. I mean, you just look at economy, a productive society, economically, socially, physically, mentally. We would be in a much different place.
And I'll add that happiness, as defined by those words, was the ownership or the taking up of space.
Yeah.
And so you can own and have your own space. And so giving room for others and not taking it all, or not being able to have any.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's a paradox. Yeah.
Rich
Mhm.
brings up that the paradox was that Thomas Jefferson had slaves, many of whom he fathered children with. And that's who wrote those words. Yeah.
And the paradox then advanced forward when the black slave was a partial person, and that changed to a full
Three-fifths.
person. Right there, we see that in our movement forward, that our view of people can change, and our view of people can say you're an actual person, and because now we view you as an actual person, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So I think that just looking at a human being, we need to reevaluate. Okay, are we looking at people as just whole human?
And so I think going back to encouragement to build this community of resistance, if to look for the people that hour outside of your normal. And there was a lot of memes and jokes going around during the BLM movement that you're collecting black friends, and they become basically this objectification of a person.
Right.
Don't collect these people for your own actualization, but
For your own virtue signal.
for the good of them.
Right.
Okay, we'll go to questions now.
Yeah. Perfect.
I'll put up the questions so that everyone can read them.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about theology and the LGBTQ community and gender identity and how we define those things. So you may have heard that there are 6 genders in Judaism. We're going to talk about that a little bit. The list I found actually had 7. So here we go.
The reason why you might have heard of that is Jim Tallarico, 6 gender Jim, right? So that's been in the news where he said that, and that's why it's so.
And now it's his nickname.
Now it's his nickname, right? Yeah.
Guy in Texas.
So the way these were constructed, they're not so much a matter of gender identity or how one feels about or perceives their own gender. These categories are more based in biology and physiology. So in our modern language, it might be more accurate to refer to these as 7 different sexes. Judaic law has some different rules for males and females and what makes them clean or unclean, their different rights and responsibilities. So it's important to Jewish scholars from ancient times until now to be thinking about these gender distinctions and how that means the law should be enacted. So here's the list. Number 1 is Zachar, which is male. Number 2 is Nekeva, which is female. Number 3 is androgynos or androgynous, having both male and female characteristics. Intersex could be a modern word that describes this sex. There's also tumtum, which is lacking sexual characteristics. Intersex may also be fit here, or maybe not. There's the Ilonit, identified female at birth, but without developing secondary female sexual characteristics at puberty. This could refer to trans folks, but it doesn't have to. There's also the Saris Hama. This is identified male at birth without developing secondary male sexual characteristics at puberty. This could also refer to trans folks, but it doesn't have to. And then there's the Saris Adam, identified male at birth without developing secondary male characteristics because of castration. Again, this could refer to trans folks, but it doesn't have to.
So how many of you is this the first time you've heard that? The 7, yeah.
Question as
It's
well.
Judaic law.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Does anyone, not everyone, 1 to 2, so 2 out of every 2,000 babies, so I guess 1 out of 1,000, are born with either visibly ambiguous genitalia or both. Correct. But think about how many babies are born. That's a lot of people.
Mhm.
Correct.
Yeah.
So this is a larger issue than just male or female.
Yep.
Chromosomes are interesting, and I think there's 16 different sets of chromosomes. It's not just XXXY.
Mhm.
There's a lot to what Shreya is saying right now.
And again, these are based in biological and physiological traits, not necessarily gender identity. And so I think that's why trans folks aren't directly represented here. It's like we're mapping 2 different categories onto each other. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they don't. Got a little lost in my notes.
Sorry, my fault.
No, that's okay. It was me. I started talking without my notes and I got lost. So if someone is not developing secondary sex characteristics, that could be about gender identity, but it could also be the body's hormones not doing typical things. So there's a lot of reasons that this could refer to trans folks or not necessarily. Even that last category, the Saris Adam, identified male at birth but castrated, it's not the best description of a trans woman because the likelihood of castration being performed willingly, at least in ancient times, is probably pretty low. In modern times, we might call that gender-affirming surgery. Furthermore, castration was often used to display power over other men, whether as prisoners of war or guardians of a harem, and you didn't want them messing with your women. So trans folks existed in Bible times, but these 7 sexes are not necessarily capturing that reality because they're focused on something different. And trying to put our modern categories onto ancient categories means sometimes it doesn't always map on perfectly. But already with that list, we can see that ancient traditions are much more comfortable with gender being a little bit more loosey-goosey than in modern evangelicalism. When it comes to the creation of the first human, The Talmud says, according to Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar, in the hour when the Holy One created the first human, he created him as an androgynos, having both male and female sexual characteristics. As it is said, male and female he created them. This is the Adamah, before God made the woman from Adam's side. Rabbi ben Elazar even describes the Adamah as having two faces, a male one and a female one. It reminds me of the Greek soulmates myth, if you know that one. Well, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. It suggests to me again that there's a lot more fluidity in thinking about gender and sex in ancient times than in modern day America. When we look at the rest of the creation account, it's a poem separating supposed binaries. So God made light and separated it from the darkness. God separated water from the dry ground. And evangelicalism tries to argue that God only made two sexes, as evidenced in Genesis 1. God made male and female. But if we look at the rest of the poem without logic, it doesn't make much sense. Did God only make day and night? What about dawn, dusk, twilight? With that evangelical logic, we would only have like noon and midnight, and that would be pretty weird.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Genesis 2 is written first, and then Genesis 1 is written later to clarify what's happening in Genesis 2 on. So those of you who wanted to know that, Genesis 2 is written first. So these interpretations by the rabbis, they would have known that. They would have known Genesis 2. We're not so wrapped up into chronology like that.
Right.
But they were. And so Genesis 2 is the primary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or for example, did God only make swamps? Or did God only make water and dry ground? Or did God also make swamps, marshes, shores, mangroves? This is a poem. And it's not just listing the individual things God made. It's more like giving the ends of a spectrum and assuming that the reader can fill in the blanks. God made oceans and rivers and lakes and bogs and mountains and valleys and buttes and geysers. God made male and female and everything in between, and it was very good. In Acts 8 is the story of the Ethiopian eunuch. Some traditions call him Simon, so I'm going to go with that. And in this story, Philip the evangelist is told by an angel to go to Gaza. While there, he comes across Simon, who had been in Jerusalem to worship, so we can assume he was probably Jewish. We can also assume he was most likely considered Saris Adam, so somebody who was identified male at birth, but without developing secondary male sexual characteristics because of castration. Simon was sitting in his chariot reading a scroll of Isaiah, specifically chapter 53. Philip joins him and asks if he understands what he's reading. Simon replies, "How can I understand unless I have a teacher to teach me?" Philip teaches about the passage, connects it to Jesus, and invites Simon to be baptized and join the Christian community, which he does. This story is a very important one for queer theology. Simon was a minority in a few respects, a racial minority and a sexual minority. He had been to Jerusalem to worship, but he didn't understand the text because he didn't have a teacher. So it's possible he was excluded from worship at the temple, because Deuteronomy 23:1 says, "If a man's testicles are crushed or his penis cut off, he shall not enter the sanctuary." Philip doesn't hesitate to teach the man and invite him into the Christian faith right then and there. Here, right at the beginning of the Christian story, we have the unquestioned acceptance of a racial and sexual minority. And I have a hunch that in the same way we interpret Genesis 1 to mean all things, not just the binaries, that this story means that all should be accepted. I wouldn't necessarily be comfortable saying without a doubt that Simon was trans, though he could have been. It's just that the categories that the biblical authors used and the categories we use are different. So maybe, maybe not. That said, I do think that trans folks can identify with Simon's experience in organized religion, and so this story remains an important one for affirming the trans experience.
Can I interject real quick?
Mm-hmm.
So Simon's important because this is a origin story for the Coptic Church.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yes.
I think Acts was trying to explain at the time why there was a group of Christians in Ethiopia. And so this Ethiopian eunuch, and most of the time eunuch held positions of power.
Mhm.
And so you were castrated at birth so that you could be in temple or
Close to the king.
palace
Yeah.
service. And so he was probably either the king or the queens of Ethiopia's main servant. And so he had a ton of power, and he was able to travel and had the money to do so a long distance. And they're trying to create the story of how did Christianity end up in Ethiopia. And it's interesting to me that they chose this person, this kind of outsider-ish, to do that.
All right, we're going to switch gears a little bit. So in past sermons, Kevin has talked a lot about the mandorla. Jake, would you pull up the first image, please? So he talks about it being the middle of a Venn diagram, the space where two circles overlap. So in religious art, that overlap is where heaven and earth meet. You've got your circle of heaven, your circle of earth, they overlap, and that space in the middle is the mandorla.
It is mandorla comes from the word almond. It's
In
an
Italian.
almond
Mhm.
shape. So that Venn diagram.
The almond branch is the first to bloom, and it's also the sacred fruit of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam.
Aaron's
Lots and lots
staff
of
with the
symbolism,
almond
yeah.
branch.
There's usually Jesus is in the mandorla, although sometimes Mary is. And there's often concentric rings in the mandorla getting darker towards the center to depict the mysterious nature of God. Here's the part that Kevin never really talked about. The mandorla is a vagina.
Mhm. I have talked about it, but just lightly.
Just a little. So, I mean, if you were looking at the art going, you're not crazy, it's there. And it is a theme in medieval art. So there's at least one account of Jesus' crucifixion where the soldier checks to see if Jesus is dead by stabbing him in the side with a spear. When Jesus resurrects, he still has the wounds from his crucifixion, including the side wound. In some medieval art, particularly in prayer books, Jesus' side wound takes the form of a vagina. Would you put up image 2, please? So sometimes the side wound vagina is Jesus' whole body. Sometimes it just appears as a disembodied side wound vagina.
Is that the next picture?
I don't know. Is it?
Is that what?
Next
The
picture?
next picture.
No,
Okay.
I didn't put that one up, but
Oh.
you're welcome to search. Just, really think carefully about your keywords before you do. I'm not going to get into the weeds about it, but there is quite a bit of writing out there. If you're interested, there is some wild stuff happening in medieval times. But what I think
That's hilarious.
matters for our discussion today is that these depictions queer Jesus in a way that I think is really important. So here's the image that I want to spend some time on. Would you put up the next one, please? This comes from the illuminated manuscript, the Bible Moralise, from Paris in 1225. It's essentially a picture Bible, and in this image, Jesus is birthing the church, personified, from his side wound vagina. Remember that at this time, most people could not read. That's part of why they had such evocative art. How else were people to learn about Jesus? And that means that the church relied heavily on metaphor when trying to teach abstract concepts. To be clear, I'm not saying that the historical Jesus who actually lived had a side wound vagina or was trans, but this artwork shows that medieval Christian scholars were very comfortable thinking about the theological Jesus, what Jesus means, in gender-bending ways. They weren't caught up in Jesus's masculinity or needing to be strong or whatever. They saw Jesus as having a mothering role. They weren't offended by or skittish of the female body. And they were comfortable with gender being a little bit loosey-goosey. So while the historical Jesus was probably not trans, theologically, when we can see Jesus, who's like the main guy, in gender-bending ways, I think it affirms that trans folks exist and are very good just the way they are. So to close my section, this quote is from Julian K. Jarboe, a writer and sound designer. God blessed me by making me transsexual for the same reason he made wheat but not bread and fruit but not wine, so that humanity might share in the act of creation.
Which one? This one?
Someone's asking to put up the picture.
Yep. Yes.
Jesus birthing the church. Yep.
I'm sure there is. Bill's asking about who the other characters are. I'm sure that there is symbolism there, that they are specific people. I did not look into that. If I had to like make a guess, I would think that the other figure who has a halo is probably John, the beloved disciple, because John was the one, at least in the John account, who was still there at the crucifixion. The one standing and catching the church.
Would it be John or Peter?
Because Peter is considered the father of the church. That's a good call.
And the Christ that's holding the chalice is the Holy Spirit because it's poured out. If you can see the little chalice of the
Just Acts.
and then I would put the men behind that as, I think John is probably in there. Sorry, I'm moving my mouse over them and no one can see that. But those would be like the original apostles, the four in the back: James, John, Peter, and Matthew.
I do appreciate what you just said, especially your usage of the word loosey-goosey. And it's really important, the idea of loosey-goosey, what Shreya is saying, because we struggle as Christians today in certainty. So our struggle is certainty. We want to be so certain about the way things are and should be that we have the sin of certainty, right? When in early times, as you're showing in these pictures, that they weren't so certain.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that this is a little bit refreshing to me when I think about it, because even our depiction of what's masculine and what's feminine, and when it comes to gender identity, or when it comes to heteronormative or homosexual, LGBTQ plus, wherever anyone is identifying, we have very strict views in modern culture of what certain gender is supposed to look like. And when we are off of that a little bit, I mean, our assumptions and judgment and criticism and ick factor and all that, because in ancient times, women carried more weight and men were different. And now, like back in the day, men were heavier and that was attractive. And now a six-pack is attractive. I mean, we have like these different views of even the way people look and present themselves. In such a really rigid,
and even if you mostly
way.
fit in the box, that little bit that doesn't, like, those strict categories harm all of us.
right? So I think that a lot of like what we, like some of this practical application and theological application does fall around your words of loosey-goosey. Because if we would hold our faith in a little more open hand and hold our faith in a more, I don't know, I think that opens up the opportunity to say, well, I don't know and you don't know, so maybe we can sit at the table and eat dinner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's go to some questions.